Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack some really complex, sometimes ancient sources and see what practical wisdom we can pull out.
Mhm.
And today, wow, we have quite the collection in front of us.
We really do. It feels like we're bridging millennia here. We've got, Stoics like Seneca rubbing shoulders with someone like Viktor Frankl, classical orators like Demosthenes next to, say, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's eclectic.
It absolutely is. And our mission today is to really dig into this idea of influence, not just, what people did, but how they actually gained that conviction, that voice to make change happen.
Yeah, we're looking for the source code, if you will. How does an individual develop that inner strength and then project it outwards to impact the world, whether it's personal transformation or big societal shifts?
And what seems to connect all these different thinkers across all this time is this kind of radical idea that real change doesn't start with the big institutions or movements necessarily.
It starts inside, with the individual's mindset, their intention, their resilience. That seems to be the common thread.
Exactly. So this isn't just abstract philosophy we're discussing. We want to try and extract almost a practical guide, focusing on the why and the how of living, and maybe speaking with real impact.
And logically, if we're building influence, all these sources seem to insist we have to start with the self, with that inner architecture. Your public voice can only be as strong as the foundation it's built on. So let's start right there. What does that inner freedom actually look like?
Okay, so when we talk about inner control, you almost have to begin with Viktor Frankl. His experiences, his insights, they define resilience in the face of the absolute worst.
Right. His core point is just foundational. External forces, circumstances, they can take everything from you, your possessions, your health, your freedom, in the physical sense. But the one thing they cannot touch
Is your freedom to choose your response, your attitude.
That's it. That's the ultimate human freedom, he argued. And he saw it firsthand in the concentration camps. Those who held onto a meaning, a why for living, they had a dramatically better chance of surviving, not just mentally, but physically.
It's that space, isn't it? That tiny gap between something happening to you and how you decide to react to it. That's where our power lies.
Precisely. And Frankl warned about what happens when we fail to use that freedom, when society loses its grip on meaning. He called it the existential vacuum.
That feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? This sense of drift, maybe.
I think so. The existential vacuum is this widespread feeling of emptiness or meaninglessness. Frankl thought that as societies became more affluent, maybe shed some traditional structures or beliefs, people were left without a strong sense of purpose.
And this vacuum doesn't just stay empty, right? It gets filled.
Yeah, and often not with good things. Frankl pointed to what he saw as the main symptoms, widespread neurosis manifesting as, well, primarily depression, aggression, and addiction. These become ways people try to fill that inner void, that lack of meaning, often with something immediate or physical.
It's a powerful diagnosis. It makes you think about how older traditions tried to address this very void. Seneca, for instance, the Roman Stoic, he had a very different idea about what constitutes a full life.
He really did. Seneca drew this incredibly sharp line between pleasure and joy. It's a crucial distinction.
How did he define them? Because they sound similar.
Well, for Seneca, pleasure was unreliable, almost a vice sometimes, because it depends entirely on external thing. A good meal, a compliment, buying something new, it's fleeting, the source disappears, the feeling goes with it.
Okay, makes sense. So what's joy then?
Joy, for Seneca, is internal. It's stable. He described it as an elation of spirit, a spirit that trusts in his own possessions.
And those possessions aren't like money or land.
No, not at all. The only true possessions, the only things that can give you that lasting, peace-giving joy are your virtue and your reason, your character, essentially. That's the only thing you truly own and control.
So he's directly challenging the Roman obsession with wealth and status. He's saying the real measure of a person isn't their bank account or how much land they own,
but how good he is. And good for a Stoic wasn't just being nice. It meant living in accordance with reason, with logic, wisdom, self-control. It's about mastering your inner world through constant, rational self-management.
That sounds admirable, but also incredibly difficult. How do you actually do that? How do you translate perfected reason into just getting through a Tuesday when you're feeling overwhelmed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's where someone like Stephen Covey, a more modern thinker, provides a bridge. He gives us a kind of practical framework for building those virtuous behaviors into habits.
Right. Covey's habit loop idea. Can you remind us how that works?
Sure. He defined a habit as the point where three things intersect. You need the knowledge knowing what to do, and crucially why you're doing it. You need the skill, knowing how to actually perform the action. And you need the desire, the motivation, the genuine want to do it.
So if any one of those is missing, say, you know you should exercise, knowledge, and you know how, skill, but you just don't want to.
Then it's not a true habit. It might be compliance or a temporary effort, but it won't stick long term. You need all three: the what, why, the how, and the want.
It's interesting that desire, or want, is so central. It connects back to Frankl's why, doesn't it? If the reason is strong enough.
Exactly. The desire needs to be aligned with the knowledge, with the purpose. And Covey takes this even further, especially when talking about relationships with his concept of love.
Yes. Love isn't just a feeling, he says.
Right. He makes this powerful distinction. The feeling of love, that warm, fuzzy emotion, is actually the fruit of loving actions. The verb to love comes first.
So if you're not feeling loving towards someone, that's precisely the time you need to act lovingly, to choose to listen, sacrifice, empathize, affirm.
That's the core idea. The action, the choice based on your values comes first, and that generates the feeling. You don't wait to feel inspired. You choose the action that aligns with your commitment.
That really shifts the focus, doesn't it? From being passive, waiting for feelings or circumstances to change, to being proactive, taking control of that inner space Frankl talked about.
It's all about moving from reaction to proaction. And that proactive stance, built on this inner architecture of choice and reason, is what prepares us to deal with the inevitable curveballs life throws at us.
Okay, so we've established this internal foundation. Frankl's freedom to respond, Seneca's focus on virtue and reason, Covey's mechanics for building habits. Now, what happens when things go wrong externally, when we hit obstacles?
Well, the first line of defense, or maybe offense, is cognitive. It's about how we mentally frame the situation. Tony Robbins talks a lot about the power of reframing.
Which isn't just thinking positively, right? It's more structural than that.
Exactly. It's not about pretending a bad situation is good. It's about consciously changing the meaning you assign to an experience by changing the context, the frame you put around it.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you lose your job. Frame 1. This is a disaster. My life is over. That leads to despair, inaction. Frame 2, okay, this is unexpected, but it's forcing me to reevaluate. What skills can I build now? What if I always wanted to try? Same event, completely different meaning, completely different emotional response and potential outcome.
So you shift it from this is happening to me to maybe this is happening for me, even if it's difficult.
That's the essence of it. You don't change the facts of the event, but you change its power over you and its potential utility. You take control of the narrative.
And building on that, Ryan Holiday, who draws a lot from the Stoics like Seneca, takes it a step further.
Yeah.
He argues that the obstacle itself isn't just something to overcome. It's the path forward. The obstacle is the way.
Yes, this is a really powerful, almost counterintuitive idea. The struggle, the resistance you face when you hit that obstacle that's not delaying your progress. That is the process of progress. Because the struggle forces you to adapt. It compels you to develop new strengths, new skills, find different approaches. The difficulty itself is what pushes you to a higher level of functioning than you were at before you encountered the problem.
So without the obstacle, we just stay the same. We wouldn't grow.
Essentially, yes. If growth is the aim, then challenges are the necessary ingredient. Holiday urges us to kind of ignore the package the problem arrives in. You know, the stress, the frustration, the loss, and look for the gift hidden inside.
The gift being the opportunity for growth, the forced development.
Exactly. The resilience you build, the creativity it sparks, the discipline it demands. If you just fight against the obstacle because you resent it, you waste energy. But if you accept it as the raw material you have to work with now, you focus all your energy on finding the way through or around or over it. And that process changes you.
Okay, that makes sense. So mastering the inner world, reframing challenges. This seems like the essential groundwork. Now, how do we take that inner strength and apply it outwardly? How do we move into the realm of public influence, of rhetoric?
Right. And as soon as we step into the public square, using our voice to persuade or influence others, we run headlong into a very old, very important philosophical question.
Which is
persuasion ethical? Or is it just manipulation dressed up in fancy words? This takes us straight back to ancient Greece, specifically to Plato and his deep suspicion of rhetoric.
Socrates, in Plato's dialogues like the Gorgias, wasn't a fan of the popular orators of his day, was he?
Not at all. His main critique was that oratory, as commonly practiced, aimed only for conviction, getting the audience to believe something. But belief, Socrates argued, can be based on falsehoods or opinions. It's not the same as true knowledge, which must be based on truth and reason.
And he felt that a big speech, delivered to a passive crowd, couldn't actually impart that true knowledge.
Exactly. For Socrates, genuine understanding, real education of the soul required dialogue, what he called elenchus. It's a back and forth where ideas are questioned, tested, challenged. A set speech or even a written text can't answer back. It can't defend itself against scrutiny in the same way.
So the speaker avoids that rigorous testing needed to move someone from just believing something to actually knowing it's true. Their conviction might be shallow.
Precisely. If you just persuade without truly educating, the audience's belief might not last, or they could be easily swayed by the next persuasive speaker.
Okay, so if Plato was so critical, how did later thinkers, especially the Romans who needed oratory for law and politics, deal with this? How did they try to make rhetoric respectable?
They essentially raised the requirements for the orator. Figures like Cicero, a master orator himself, insisted that the ideal speaker couldn't just be skilled with words, they had to be deeply knowledgeable.
Knowledgeable about what?
About almost everything relevant to public life. Laws, history, philosophy, human nature, military affairs, finance. Cicero believed true eloquence had to be rooted in substantial understanding. Otherwise, you're just a technician, not a true leader or guide.
And Quintilian, another Roman rhetorician, took that even further, didn't he?
He did. Quintilian argued that the potential subject matter for rhetoric is, well, everything. Anything that people might need to discuss or debate publicly falls within the orator's purview.
Wow. That's incredibly broad scope.
It is, and because the potential power of such a person is so immense, Quintilian added a crucial requirement. The ideal orator must, above all else, be a good man. Vir bonus, digendi peritas, a good man, skilled in speaking. Morality was inseparable from the skill.
That's a very high bar. Knowledge and virtue. It makes you think about whether such orators are born or made. And that brings us to Demosthenes.
Demosthenes. His story is just incredible. It's a powerful answer to anyone who thinks, oh, I could never be a good public speaker. He is living proof that influence is earned through action and discipline, not just natural talent.
Tell us a bit about his background. He didn't exactly start with advantages, did he?
Far from it. He was physically frail as a child. His guardians apparently cheated him out of much of his inheritance. And crucially, he had significant speech impediments. Sources say he had a lisp or stammer, weak lungs, and even an awkward shoulder shrug that distracted listeners.
So how did he transform himself into one of Athens' greatest orators? The stories about his training are legendary.
They really are. He was known for going to extremes. To strengthen his voice and articulation against crowd noise, he'd reportedly practiced speaking with pebbles in his mouth down by the seashore, trying to project over the waves.
The pebbles in his mouth, that sounds painful.
And apparently, to fix that shoulder shrug, he practiced speaking underneath swords hanging from the ceiling, positioned so they'd prick him if he shrugged involuntarily. He'd also recite speeches while running uphill to build lung capacity.
That's not just practice, that's sheer force of will. It's like he physically embodied that stoic ideal of self-mastery to overcome his limitations.
Absolutely. And it was that hard-won mastery, that visible discipline, that gave his words such weight when he finally took the stage to warn Athens about the rising threat of Philip II of Macedon.
Right, his famous speeches, the Philippics. He was trying to wake Athens up to the danger.
Exactly. This wasn't just abstract debate for him. When he spoke about Philip's aggression, capturing cities like Amphipolis or Methone, the actual survival of Athens and other Greek city-states was on the line. His influence came not just from powerful arguments, but from the audience knowing the immense effort and conviction behind those words. He earned the right to be heard.
So Demosthenes shows the power that comes from discipline. Let's circle back to Quintilian and the ethical side. How did he try to ensure that this hard-won skill was used responsibly? You mentioned his structure for arguments.
Yes, Quintilian proposed a kind of logical framework for analyzing any disputed issue, designed to ground the argument in reason before getting lost in emotion or manipulation. He called it the three inquiries.
Okay, what are they?
First, you ask and sit whether it is. Is the alleged fact true? Did the event actually happen? Establish the reality first. Second, quid sit what it is. If it happened, how do we define it? Is this act murder or self-defense? Is this policy an investment or wasteful spending? Define the terms.
And the third?
Quail sit of what kind it is. Now you assess the quality or nature of the act or proposal. Is it good or bad? Just or unjust? Major or minor? wise or foolish. Only after you agree on the facts and the definition can you properly debate its quality.
That seems like a really useful way to structure a debate, even today. Like in politics, you shouldn't argue about whether a policy is good or bad, the third inquiry, before you've even established the facts about what the policy actually does, the first,
Yeah.
and clearly define its terms, the second.
Exactly. It promotes intellectual honesty. It forces you to build your case on solid ground before you start trying to persuade based on values or emotions.
But even with this structure, Quintilian faced that really thorny ethical question we touched on earlier. Can the good man, the ideal orator, ever justify telling a lie?
Right. This is where it gets really complex. Quintilian, aiming for that ideal of the virtuous orator working for the public good, had to confront situations where absolute truthfulness might actually cause harm.
So what was his conclusion?
He concluded, rather controversially, that the good man will sometimes tell a lie, but only if it's done for a truly honorable reason and purpose. The end goal, the higher good, could, in very specific circumstances, justify a departure from strict truth.
That sounds dangerous. Who decides what's an honorable purpose? Doesn't that open the door to justifying any convenient lie in politics or law?
That's the immediate risk, absolutely. And Quintilian was aware of it. He didn't present this as a general license to deceive. He gave very specific, extreme examples.
Like what?
Like lying to misdirect an assassin who's looking for an innocent person, or telling a falsehood to save a valued citizen from unjust persecution, or even, he notes, the sort of white lies told to sick children or the elderly to prevent unnecessary distress.
So the lie has to be protective, directly aimed at preventing a greater imminent harm or achieving a clear, significant good for someone innocent or the community.
Yes. The justification is narrow and focused on preventing immediate severe harm or achieving an undeniable good, like saving a life. It's not intended as an excuse for political spin or misleading people about policy for strategic advantage. The overall intention and the long-term benefit to the community remain the ultimate ethical guide.
Okay, that clarifies the high ethical bar. It's not just about technique, it's about purpose, which leads us naturally into how these principles of influence and voice have been applied in the real world, specifically in struggles for societal change, for justice, for economic opportunity.
Exactly. Let's look at how influential figures tried to reshape their societies, starting with an perhaps unexpected voice in this context, Russell Conwell and his Acres of Diamonds lecture.
Right, that lecture was hugely popular. What was his core message?
Conwell's message was radically simple and local. He argued again and again that the greatest opportunities for wealth, success, and making a difference weren't in some distant place or exotic venture. They were right under your nose, in your own town, with your own neighbors, using the skills and resources you already had.
He had that famous story about the professor, right?
Yes, the story of the mineralogy professor from, I think it was Newburyport, Massachusetts. He owned a homestead, but was convinced true wealth lay in finding gold or diamonds far away. So he sold his land to finance his quest.
And what happened?
He sold the farm and went off searching, apparently never finding much. Meanwhile, the man who bought the homestead was building a stone wall on the property, using stones from a stream running through it. And in doing so, he discovered a large deposit of native silver right there on the land the professor had sold, maybe even near where they'd sat, finalizing the deal.
Wow. Talk about missing what's right in front of you.
Exactly. Conwell used stories like that to hammer home the idea. Look around you first. Understand your local environment, your community's needs, the opportunities others have overlooked because they seem too ordinary or close by.
And importantly, Conwell didn't just preach grabbing opportunity. He tied it to ethics, didn't he? His royal road to great wealth.
Absolutely. He insisted that true sustainable wealth wasn't about exploiting others. It involved, as he put it, living and letting live. Sharing profits fairly, demanding your own rights, while respecting the rights and needs of others in your community.
He had that line about the man who feels he's robbed someone.
Yes, that he arises tired in the morning even if he has millions, because genuine success, the kind that lets you sleep peacefully, requires ethical conduct. It echoes Seneca's inner peace is tied to outer virtue. Wealth accumulation had to be part of a positive sum game for the community.
That idea of finding opportunity locally and building from where you are, it resonates strongly with Booker T. Washington's message, particularly in his Atlanta Compromise speech.
It really does. Washington's famous metaphor, cast down your bucket where you are, was a direct appeal to make the most of the present situation, however difficult.
And he directed that message to both black and white audiences in the South, right?
Yes. To the white South, he was saying, essentially. Instead of relying on immigrant labor, which often leads to conflict, look to the 8 million black citizens already here. We know how to work, we're loyal, we've built this region alongside you, cast down your bucket among us.
And to the black community, what was the message? Especially when many felt the need to leave the South.
It was the same core message. Start here. Focus on acquiring practical, industrial, agricultural, and vocational skills. Learn trades, buy land, build businesses. Dignify and glorify common labor, he urged. Prove your economic value within the existing structure.
Which led to the controversial part, the compromise.
Right. The famous line. In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. He was signaling a willingness to temporarily set aside the fight for immediate social integration and political equality in exchange for the promise of economic opportunity and security. It was a strategic choice, aiming for gradual uplift through economic self-reliance.
A strategy that drew criticism, of course, because other influential voices demanded a much more immediate confrontation with the injustices of the system. Sojourner Truth, for instance.
Absolutely. Sojourner Truth's voice was one of urgent, uncompromising demand for action now. She famously challenged audiences to stop waiting for some future generation of well-educated men to lead the fight against slavery and inequality.
What was her call to action? What did she want people to do immediately?
She was incredibly practical. Sign petitions, flood Congress with demands to abolish slavery, starting with Washington, D.C. Use the tools available right now. She said, "We have slumbered and slept too long already. No more waiting."
And she also pointed out the very real, everyday barriers faced by black people, didn't she? Even in supposedly free states.
Yes. She highlighted how even basic jobs, printer, clerk, salesman, were effectively closed off, reserved for whites. This created desperate poverty, which she argued could only be overcome through cooperation, through collective effort among laborers. Her voice cut through complacency and demanded immediate, practical steps towards justice.
That focus on the systemic nature of injustice, particularly economic injustice, is also central to Nelson Mandela's arguments against apartheid much later.
Mandela was meticulous in dissecting the mechanisms of apartheid. He didn't just condemn racism in the abstract. He detailed the specific laws and policies that enforced white supremacy and black inferiority, especially economically.
He made a crucial point about the comparison, didn't he? It wasn't just about being poor.
Right. He stressed that the primary grievance wasn't simply that black South Africans were poor compared to people in, say, other African countries. The burning injustice was that they were kept poor compared to the white population within their own country by laws deliberately designed to prevent them from competing fairly or improving their situation.
Can you remind us of some of those specific laws he targeted?
The pass laws were absolutely central. These weren't just about carrying identity documents. They controlled every aspect of movement, dictating where black people could live, work, or even visit. They tore families apart, led to constant police harassment, and fueled immense social instability in the townships.
In the economic policies.
He often cited the civilized labor policy, which explicitly reserved certain jobs, particularly skilled or semi-skilled positions in government and industry, for white workers, often regardless of their qualifications, creating an artificial ceiling for black advancement. It was systemic economic oppression codified into law.
So while Mandela focused on dismantling these external structures, someone like Malcolm X directed his powerful voice more towards the internal, the psychological impact of racism.
Yes, Malcolm X saw psychological liberation as the essential first step. He often spoke about his own life experiences, including his time in prison, not as setbacks, but as crucial preparation, a kind of discipleship that equipped him to understand and articulate the black experience.
And his message, especially drawing from Elijah Muhammad's teachings, was about breaking free mentally.
Exactly. He famously described those teachings as a two-edged sword, cutting away the internalized racism and inferiority complexes imposed by centuries of white domination. You had to free the mind first. You had to reject the white man's definitions of you, his history of you, his image of you, before you could effectively challenge his external systems of power. That internal psychological revolution was paramount.
So we have these powerful voices working through activism, organizing, and speaking truth to power. But influence can also be wielded within the system itself, like through the courts. Ruth Bader Ginsburg offered a really interesting perspective on the role of judicial voice in social change.
She did, and her view was quite strategic, perhaps even cautious. She argued that courts, including the Supreme Court, generally don't lead major social changes. They tend to follow shifts that are already happening in society.
So the court's role isn't to be revolutionary, but more responsive.
More like reinforcing or validating. Ginsburg believed the court works best when it signals a green light for a change that's already gaining momentum, or when it nudges along an evolution that's underway in state legislatures or public opinion.
She famously had reservations about the Roe v. Wade decision, didn't she? Not necessarily the outcome, but the approach.
Right. Her critique was that the Roe decision was perhaps too sweeping, too abrupt. It effectively nationalized a very divisive issue overnight, short-circuiting the state-by-state legislative process where abortion rights were already gradually expanding.
And her concern was that this kind of broad judicial intervention could provoke a backlash.
Exactly. She worried it could galvanize opposition and actually make the issue more divisive and harder to resolve politically in the long run, which, you could argue, is what happened. Her own approach, especially in the gender discrimination cases she argued and later ruled on, tended to be more incremental. Chip away at the discriminatory structures, step by step, building precedent, and allowing society to adjust.
Could you give an example of that incremental approach in action? Maybe the Moritz case she argued early on.
Oh, the Moritz case is perfect. Charles Moritz was a single man denied a tax deduction for expenses related to caring for his dependent elderly mother. Why? Because the tax code at the time only allowed that deduction for women or for widowed or divorced men.
Based on the assumption that caregiving was women's work.
Precisely. It was based on the stereotypical and discriminatory assumption that only women were primary caregivers and men were primarily breadwinners. By challenging the seemingly minor tax provision on behalf of a man, Ginsburg strategically exposed the inherent gender bias embedded in the law, showing how it harmed both sexes by reinforcing rigid roles. Congress actually changed the law before the Supreme Court could rule, but the case highlighted the pervasive nature of gender stereotypes in the legal system.
And later, as a justice, the VMI case, striking down the Virginia Military Institute's men-only admissions policy, was another example of the court reinforcing a societal shift towards gender equality in education.
Absolutely. Her work consistently aimed to use the judicial voice to ensure the law caught up with the evolving understanding that society couldn't afford to exclude the talents of half its population based on outdated stereotypes.
So RBG represents this careful strategic use of institutional voice. But her work and the work of all these activists stands in stark contrast to what Ally Wiesel identified as perhaps the greatest danger of all, indifference.
Wiesel's perspective here is chilling and absolutely vital. He argued that indifference is not neutral. It's not just a lack of feeling or interest. It's an active force, siding with the oppressor, enabling suffering.
He said it was the opposite of, well, everything important, didn't he?
He did. He stated powerfully that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And perhaps most critically, the opposite of life is not death, but indifference.
That's devastating. To be indifferent to suffering, to injustice, to disease or famine, it's not just passive, it's choosing the side of the problem.
It's tantamount to complicity in his view. If the orator, the activist, the judge, the leader are defined by their conscious choice to engage, to speak, to act, then Wiesel forces us to confront the immense moral weight of choosing not to act, choosing to look away. Silence, indifference, it allows the void to grow.
Which brings us back full circle, really. The necessity of engaging, of using our voice, seems almost like a moral imperative based on these insights.
It truly does. And reflecting on this whole deep dive, there's this fascinating essential tension that emerges, isn't there?
What's the core tension you see?
On one hand, you have this absolute necessity for inner work. Frankl's choice, Seneca's reason, Covey's habits, Holiday's reframing. You must build that internal architecture of resilience and principle first. That's non-negotiable.
Right, that self-mastery is the foundation.
But then on the other hand, you have the undeniable external imperative, the call to apply that inner strength, that voice, to the world around us, whether it's demanding justice, like Sojourner Truth, dismantling systems like Mandela, or carefully shaping law like RBG. The inner work has to fuel the outer action.
The strengths developed internally has to be directed towards some external good.
Exactly. And the deepest challenge maybe is ensuring that alignment is always there.
Yeah.
Making sure our public voice, our actions are genuinely rooted in that carefully cultivated inner conviction based on knowledge and principle, like Cicero and Quintilian urged, and not just, fleeting beliefs or emotional reactions, which Plato warned us about.
And perhaps a final thought to leave everyone with. Let's go back to Russell Conwell for a moment. his slightly unusual definition of success.
Yeah, that powerful idea that the truly successful person isn't just the one with the most money, but the one who goes home at night feeling they've dealt ethically with others, given them their due while taking their own, and hasn't stolen or cheated. That person, Conwell said, lives every day and avoids that tired morning.
So if that kind of inner peace, that Senecan joy or Covey-esque integrity, is fundamentally linked to our external actions, to our ethical engagement with the world.
Then the question for all of us becomes, what action, maybe even a small, seemingly mundane one, are you putting off right now? What acre of diamonds in your own environment may be helping someone else, speaking up about something unjust, starting that ethical venture could you act on today? Because maybe unlocking that isn't just about finding your own success, but about contributing in some way to your own integrity and potentially someone else's freedom. That's where real influence might just begin.